let me kindly set the stage for how this program came about. The Gentrys had a little open house right before Christmas, and Cindy and Mary Pierce were conspiring in the corner, and they said, wouldn't it be great if we could get those two together and do a program? And so just like that, they said, let's do something about Franklin, and let's do it at the theater, and let's do all this. And then they said, well, let's do it maybe Valentine's Day. And so we'd say, Love Franklin, and that was going to be the topic, but we couldn't get the 13th of February, so it was put off till tonight. So here we are in the middle of April and spring, and here we have, tonight you have the benefit of Mr. Gentry, who has been here 89 years, and I've been here 45 years, so between us, we've seen a lot of history, but standing out in the lobby and seeing some of the people come in, we got our game to play tonight, big boy.
Absolutely. We probably, Rick, are going to say something that we remembered, and someone else in the audience said, no, I remember this or that, so you're perfectly willing to do that, and glad to have you do that. This is just what we remember, and I may not remember it exactly like you do, but I do remember Franklin from the past.
Mr. Gentry, Coach Gentry has lived here and has seen a lot that I have not, and about all I know is what I read in the paper. I'm kind of like Will Rogers, or I've picked up from someone. But we started out with this slide, and it's probably one of my favorites of all, and there's kind of a history behind it you may need to know. I kind of have a reputation of gathering up photographs, and I was out on Old Carter's Creek Pike visiting Miss Elizabeth Whitley, and Ellis came in. That was her husband, and he was kind of a gruff old guy, but he was good-natured, and he seemed to take a liking to me. And so he said, son, I've got something I bet you would like. And I said, what would that? He said, well, I know you like old things. And so he took me out to his sister's house out on Murfreesboro Road, there where Mac Hatcher crosses, Miss Cynthia Wilson, and went to the back porch, and behind the freezer was this large aerial photograph of Franklin that he moved everybody in town. You know, Franklin in October, it was just like a fruit basket turnover. Everyone moved from one house to the other, and in one of his moves, he had found this photograph. Instead of throwing it away, he stuck it behind the freezer. So I had the benefit of this, and we've shared it with many people. It's been used in several things, but we know, there's no date on it, but we know that it is 1950. And I can tell you that by, if you'll notice, here on, this is Main Street, and right here you will see is where the old motel was. The old Shea House was there, and they tore it down. Mr. Billy Bethurham Sr. bought that property, and he tore down the old house, which was a crime. We've lost a lot of things in Franklin, and that was really a crime because it was one of the oldest houses in town, and he tore it down and built a motel. You all may remember later Gerald Smithson and them had it, but that's why we know, and that was 1950. Now, this is the road we call the Nashville Pike. Now it's Franklin Road, right, Coach? Right. And Today we're going to talk about things that happened mainly on Main Street. Coach, tell us about your experiences there at the 5 Points.
Well, there's a lot of things to say about 5 Points. Of course, obviously, where it's 5 Points, the 5 streets meet there. And this is the elementary school that he's pointing out right now. And to be out front of the elementary school and going right to that point, yes, right just where he's showing you, was the sidewalk. And the boys were on this side and the girls on the other side. And you wouldn't dare be caught over on the girls' side. And sometimes they'd kick a ball and it'd roll over, wouldn't anybody go get it? Because they're afraid somebody see them on the girls' side. But that's where it was. And Mr. Riley Lawson was the janitor there, and we love Mr. Lawson. I could say some things about him. He's a great guy. But anyway, that's where I went to school, and that's where about 100% of the people in those days went to school, right there in that building at 5 Points. And so I have fond memories of it. Mr. A.J. Horn was the principal, and he had a brass horn that he'd blow. And we call him, and I say this respectfully, Old Jake Horn with a belly full of corn. And kids, we didn't know what we were saying. We just thought that was the funniest thing in the world. But he would blow that horn, and we'd go into after recess and so on. So that's where I went to elementary school, and everybody that lived in Franklin at that time went to school right there. I can remember Miss Josephine Wirt had a class in there, and I remember Miss Josephine, she was ambidextrous. She could smack you left-handed or right-handed. And she did. She got your attention right away. And so I remember all those people in that school building right there, the teachers and all. And it was a sad day when we had to see it burn down. So anyway, that's 5 Points. And while I've got the microphone, I want to say this about knowing a little bit about Franklin. I had a job when I was in, I think 7th, 8th grade, all the way through high school. I would go downtown on Main Street before I go to school, and I'd be down there before the stores actually opened, because I was working for a bread company out of Nashville, Colonial Bread Company, and they would come to town before the stores opened and put the bread out on the sidewalk. My job was to come and put it in the stores when they opened at 7 o'clock, and then I'd do that and come on to school at that time. But the most interesting thing to me about that early morning that we did in Franklin was that they actually swept the streets. The man with a 2-wheel cart pulled by an old horse, and he'd come down the street, and he was sweeping Main Street. And they'd go both sides and have it perfectly clean. Very few cars then, about as many horses at that time than we had cars. So Main Street would be swept every morning with a broom and put the trash in before the people came. And then sometimes the merchants would come in, open the door, leave it open, and go on down to Chapman's Pie Wagon on the square and have breakfast. The store's open all this time. They're not even there. Most of them would do that. So anyway, that's my early memories of downtown Franklin. But more things, we'll come across a lot more things in a few minutes.
Coach, are you saying that people were more honest back then than they are today?
I think so, because I don't remember anybody ever taking anything out of those stores. They was open every morning. They weren't even there. And they go to eat breakfast and come back to the store.
Well, one of the great things I think about this photograph, and I've studied it a good deal, is really what's missing. I have taken this photograph and put red dots on one at the office, and it's really amazing how many buildings are no longer there. I mean, you're talking about all of this is gone. This right here where Rainey Lunn lived, that's gone. This is parking lot now for the hospital, for the post office, so all this is gone. All over town, there's lots that are filled up with something else, but that's progress. Let's go to number 2, and this is an aerial looking the other way. We're right here at 5 Points, and this would be Columbia Avenue. Coach, tell us about this spot right here we call the county center.
Well, the county center was developed by Mr. W.C. Yates, really. He's behind that, and that's where they had the first horse shows in Franklin. It was right there in that spot. But that also was the athletic field for Franklin High School, which is in front of it when it moved up on the hill, right there where he's showing you, and had a wooden fence around it. That didn't really mean anything much, because the kids around it climb all the fences anyway to get in. But that was where they had the first horse shows, was at the county center. And we also had tennis courts there for the first time. And then the football field was there for the high school, and baseball field also. So that was called the county center for a long, long time.
Well, now you are also the first director of that.
Well, yes, and Mr. Yates got it going, and he put me in charge of it, and that's what my job was, to look after the county center. And I've got to get in a few little funny ones in here.
Go right ahead. That's what they're here for, Coach.
Because, and I say this respectfully, the blacks would come up there, and one would come up and and play, and they called him 4-Day. And so I said, 4-Day. And so one day I said, why do y'all call him 4-Day? He said, he's black and it is 4-Day. Not before day, 4-Day. So anyway, that's how they got his name 4-Day, because he's black and it is before. They said 4-Day. And so that was his nickname. And also we had others that would come up there and play, and we had something that going at about that time. I shouldn't even tell this one, I guess.
Oh,
but
go ahead.
We had a lot of fun with those little ones, because we said that the hairy man might come around. And that's all you had to say, the hairy man. They started looking all around, they scared, and they said, I think I see him coming down. They'd all run home. We just made it up. So the hairy man was in full control of the county center for a long, long time.
Well, Coach, now didn't the Franklin Training School also use the football field?
They used the football field, yes, they did. They didn't have a field of their own.
Yeah, they would be right here on Natchez Street today. Now, this is Natchez running from this area right here we call Baptist Neck, running down to Carter's Creek Pike.
Okay.
And take a look now. You see all this open fields back there. That was farmland in 1950, and today it's filled with houses and development. This up here would be Winstead Hill. If you go there today and look back north towards town, you'll see a much different place. This would be Adams Street, and right around this time is when you had some development out there, James Avenue and some of those. Come a little bit later. But this is a good view looking in the other direction.
Locate BGA on there.
Oh, I'm sorry. BJ is going to be right up in, let's see, it's probably going to be right there. That's
BGA.
That's
right
BGA right there. And I think that's probably the gym that was just built. Wasn't it built in 48 or 49?
Yeah, George I. Briggs Gymnasium.
Yeah, gymnasium right there.
The reason I wanted to go there, something interesting used to happen in Franklin. Every year, BGA had a tug of war, and they divided them into two literary societies, the Greers and the Platos. And on the day of the tug of war, show them again where it is.
Right there.
They would go from right there and carry the rope. The rope was about as long from here out to the street here. And they would march down hit Columbia, that's it, and right on down, come on down to the bridge at going out Nashville Pike, Franklin Road, some of them, Nashville Pike, and have the tug of war. But they'd carry the rope down there on the shoulder and chant on the way down there. That's tug of war every year.
Okay, now let's go to this next one. This 1948 was a banner year for many things, and one of the great floods that it wasn't the record. The 2010 would have been a record, but this gives us some idea now of this is 5 Points again. This is where the corner drug, and going down, and you get down past Bridge Street, and you've got all this water. Franklin High School, of course, wasn't built at this time, but it'd be in this area over here, and then you've got all this area back along what's going to be hopefully Bicentennial Park one day. This would be the cemetery. And
Franklin Laundry, you see.
Franklin Laundry. J.C. Anderson had that.
It got flooded also.
Oh, yeah.
My brother worked there and had to go down there in a boat, row himself down there and get some things out of there.
Now, is there anything particular you remember about the 48 flood?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember it.
Okay. Now, this is 2010, and we're looking at a slightly different area, but of course this would be where Alexander Ford, this is Fifth Avenue, and the water looks pretty...
There it is, yeah.
There, yeah. This would be that area that floods quite often. And then down, of course, this is where Sharps Branch runs. That's one of the main reasons why this floods so bad, is because Sharps Branch has no way to expel itself into the Harpeth, and so it backs up. This creek, Hard Bargain, of course, is going to be over here. This is the county, They've moved now, but that building's still there.
Sonic's right about there.
Yeah,
isn't
the
it?
Sonic, remember, tell us what was there where the Sonic was before
Oh, me.
the Morning Star?
Okay, that was the Morning Star. It was a nightclub, and it was operated by Mule Britton. Mule Britton was a black man and a good man, but he operated the Morning Star.
Right there.
And quite honestly, the police spent most of their time around the Morning Star every Saturday night. But that's where Mule Britton would hang out. That's his place.
Well, now we're going back to the 48 flood. Now this is Fifth Avenue, and you can see it. It's quite. Let's say something about the locker. People may not realize before everyone had deep freeze.
Well, yeah, back in those days, most people didn't have deep freeze.
Yeah.
But the locker would, you take your meat down there and they store it for you there. And if you needed meat, you go down there and get your meat out of storage. And just had another one big deep freeze what they had, and just put your name on it and put it in there.
You had almost like a basket, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a basket, had your name on it, and then you put it in there.
Yeah, I think Mr. Lavender.
I forgot you paid a little bit of money for renting of the deep freeze.
This is another view. This is 3rd Avenue and the Murfreesboro Road Bridge. But have a look at Ewingville. You can see the Crowell place. Of course, probably then would have been the Judge Burke lived there. And then Dr. Shannon's place would have been over here. But that tells the tale.
Well, I have something else in mind, not the flood necessarily.
You're thinking about the chickens, aren't you?
The trailer truckload of chickens came into Franklin once from Murfreesboro, coming into Franklin, and he misguided himself a little bit and hit the corner of the bridge and knocked it off the foundation, and the chickens were all in the truck went off in the water, and the chickens all on this bridge, on the trees, bushes, and in the water, and the local people were running around trying to catch chickens for about an hour there, and as many as they could. But that was the chicken bridge for a long time.
I expect Billy Speck was in on that. I know she's out there in the audience.
I think Billy Speck was one of them out there.
One of the chicken lovers. Now, I want y'all to take a look. I want to give credit for these photographs you've seen lately, but many of y'all may know Mr. Bill Montgomery, but he was the engineer out at WSM Tower, but he was also a great photographer, and he took these photographs that some of them you're going to see that was taken in the 40s, and this is one that I really, when Mary let me or shared this with me, I couldn't believe what I was seeing, because you all may not realize this, but we talk about Dotson's. Well, Dotson's going to be about right there. Yeah. Tidewater's is going to be about right here. Pack Roberts filling station is going to be there. Now, the only thing left today would be the silos. This is the plant known as Lily Mill. It was probably one of the main economic engines in town, because back before Williamson County grew houses, they grew a large quantity of corn and wheat. And this was the place that you sold your corn and wheat, Mr. Ernest and Wilbur Corn. But notice, though, how high the water is here. And this is this is East Main Street right here. Now, even in the big flood we had 2010, the water didn't get over the bridge. It got up under the bridge and was pushing up the blacktop. But this is pretty scary.
I remember the water hitting the bridge and jumping over into the street. It never really got over into it. Got that close to covering the bridge. And right below the bridge, while I got my mind on the bridge, Mr. Horace German had a garden down there. Yeah. And he kept it. It was a beautiful garden, and he just took it over himself down on the riverbank, and had weeping willow trees down there, and he had a garden, and he raised flowers and that sort of thing. But the weird thing about it was, when he'd go home sometimes, he'd take some of them home with him in a large stand, and he'd fill it about half full of water and tie a rope onto it and drag it down Main Street with the flowers behind him, just dragging it along on the sidewalk. A large stand full of flowers on his way home.
Coach, you know what the name of the garden? His little park?
No, I don't remember that.
Sophronia Park. And
is that it?
Sophronia Eggleston.
Oh, yeah, Miss Sophronia.
Sophronia.
Oh, Miss Sophronia Eggleston. Let me stop there.
Okay.
I thought the world of that lady, and let me tell you why I love that lady. And it's a good lesson for us all, I think. We didn't have much growing up, but I was able to catch muskrats and get some money, and I bought a shirt. I was so proud of my shirt, and I wore it to school one day, and Miss Sophronia said, "Jimmy, come here. You got the prettiest shirt I believe I've ever seen." It made me feel 10 feet tall for Miss Sophronia Eggleston to say that to me. I remember that to this day, and that's all she said. "You got the prettiest shirt I ever saw."
So a compliment goes a long way for a young child, doesn't it?
Boy.
This is a look at the bridge. This is the same 48 flood, and you're looking at the Nashville Pike. Tidewater, you all may remember, would be about right in here. And you notice the billboards, which we don't have many of those in Franklin anymore, thank goodness. But Highway 31.
Yeah.
This bridge was built in 1920. It was opened in 1929, and it was called the Memorial Bridge because they were recognizing the World War I veterans, and that was their memorial. You can see here it's pretty much covered with water, but this was a good experience. This is one of my favorite photographs, and of the square. You recognize a lot there, Coach?
Yeah, boy.
You're going to say something about the power wagon?
Yeah, that's Chapman's right there. And Miss Smithwick had one over here on 3rd Avenue.
We got a picture of that in a minute.
Yeah, okay.
I always look at the details of a photograph to try to determine when it was taken. And this photograph, I want to see that little circle right there. That was the Blue Eagle. The New Deal had the NRA, and it was 1934. Then the Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional. A lot of the businessmen didn't agree with setting prices and doing certain things, so it was defeated. But this photograph you see today, it's a roundabout rather than a square, and the cannons are there, of course. And I want to say this, compliment Franklin. Coach, you probably know this too. Every time I go around the square now with the new cannon carriages, it's so rewarding to see young children out there climbing on those, because that's a good way to learn history and to physically feel a Civil War cannon.
Now, we did have a Civil War cannon down at the elementary school,
Yeah.
but they'd take it up to Franklin High School, and sometimes the boys would roll it back down the hill. Wasn't supposed to do that. And we used it as a bank. We'd hide money in the barrel of it, and that was we'd hide, and all the rest of them watching us hide it, so we'd fight them to keep them from getting our money. Can you get in the corner over there?
Huh?
Can you get in the corner behind it?
You mean over here?
Just show it right in the very corner of the building.
Oh, you're going to talk about the bank?
I won't, well, not only the bank, I've got something else I want to tell
Okay.
you. Right there in that corner that he's pointing to, in that corner right there was Baker Lane's barbershop.
Oh, yeah, right.
Well,
Tell us about
you-
Baker Lane.
Baker Lane was a one-armed barber, and his arm was cut off right at the shoulder here, right at the elbow. But what he would do, he'd put a rubber band around it and put the comb up under that, and he would hit you with it sometimes, and then comb your hair. And the reason I wanted to tell that, when I had one of my brothers, there were 5 of us boys, and one of them had never been to the barber before, and so they took him over there, and he was scared, and Baker hit him something. He jumped out of the chair and ran around the square. They chased him around the square. He still had the apron on while they was chasing him. That's where the one-armed barber was, right in that corner.
And while we're talking about barbershops, we had Jake's would been right in here with it.
Yeah.
This scene has been hand-colored, of course, and may need to say something about, well, let's go back here. I've jumped it.
Yeah, leave it right there.
Now, this is another scene of the town in this main street, and you notice the cars are parked at an angle.
I got to tell a story here.
Yeah,
Lonnie Garner shoe store.
right here.
Harry Isaacs worked in there, and hold this for me.
Oh, okay.
Harry would take a wallet on April Fool's Day, and he would take the wallet and get a $20 bill and cut the corner off and sew it right in the edge of the wallet so it would just show a little bit. I'll show you what he did. About like that, and then he had a hole drilled through it. He run a wire through that and closed it down, and then dropped that wire through a manhole on the street and had holes in it, and put a cowbell underneath there and lay it down, and people would come along and see it, and they'd try to pick it up and the cowbell would ring. Well, one of the nicest ladies in Franklin came along, she saw it, and everybody's watching out of the windows. She goes, puts her foot on it, looks all around and tries to pick it up. And then some of the blacks would get over there and try to pick it up, and then they get across the street and watch others try to pick it up without stopping, and then they break his arm and he'd go back and pick it up. So they were always having pranks there, and Doc Hodge worked in there. Doc was a black guy, and Doc made a mistake one day of saying he's going squirrel hunting in the morning, and they said, "Oh, you got your shell?" Said, "Yeah, I got my shell," and he had a box of 12-gauge shells. Well, that was a terrible mistake, what he just said. "There's my shells." Well, he got busy, and they took the shell out of his box and put a half a brick in it. It'll fit perfectly in a 12-gauge box of shells. And the next day, Doc goes hunting about 4 o'clock in the morning. All he's got's a brick.
So Franklin was a town of pranksters.
Oh, that was a good one there.
Now, this is before our streetscape program. You know, we pride ourselves now in what Main Street looks like, and it's changed over the years. This, you see, is not a very attractive street. The buildings, the awnings are sometimes not well kept, and they're irregular. And then, of course, you've got these electric poles and telephone poles running down the street. And, of course, right there, you want to say something about Shamrock?
Well, let me say this. I may come back to Shamrock,
Okay.
But that block there, see, Franklin was 2 blocks long. That's the block on the square, off of the square going south, and that was more active than the other block down here. And so I remember the stores were there, all the stores were there, and he mentioned the Shamrock, showing the Shamrock was a sort of a saloon, I guess. It was one of those places that your mama said don't ever go in there. And so that told us right off the bat, and so sometimes things would happen in there that wasn't supposed to happen, and the police spent a lot of time at the Shamrock. And let me say this, there's the Shamrock, the square, you see this monument. The police station, jail, and all is over in the corner on the square. The fire department's over there, the jail, and the police department are all on the square in Franklin, Tennessee, in one building.
Yeah, we'll see that in just a minute.
We'll go to that in a minute.
There's also, when I came, there were meters.
Yeah, had the meters.
You see here, they've got the meters you put in, a nickel, I think. Now, this photograph I found in the newspaper, and it's 1965, and this, of course, is our statue they call Chip because of his brim of his hat was broken. But look how unattractive our town is then at that time. We came in 70, and it looked just about like this. There were vacant stores, pool halls, the beer joints were here. Some of the, it just wasn't a very well-kept place.
No, but now I want to tell one story. I don't know if this is true, but we were always told the reason he had part of his brim of his hat's gone is a drunk shot it off with a pistol.
No,
I don't know whether that's true or not.
That's not true.
I don't think it is.
That happened because as they were
erecting
putting the statue on top of the granite shaft, a wagon, a guy hard of hearing, and he pulled up on the square, and his wheel got caught in the rope, one of the ropes, and it pulled, causing the statue to bump up against the granite. And of course, marble is softer than granite, so naturally it broke. And they tried to put everything back and it didn't work. So he's been.
Let's see, Rick, and on that block there were 4 grocery stores on that block.
Let's talk about what were some of those?
Well, H.G. Hill was on the corner of 4th Avenue in Maine.
Where the registry is today.
On the south side.
Yeah.
And then next door was Piggly Wiggly. We called it Hoggly Woggly. H.G. Hill, then Piggly Wiggly, Ed Thurman, and Jeanette's were on this side, on the south side, across the street from M.P. Brothers. Now, that's not the only grocery stores we had, but that's in that
Just
block.
on that block,
in that block.
Yeah. Now, let's talk about the Blue Ribbon Days.
Oh, boy.
You're probably in that
I'm
picture.
in that one. That's interesting. Blue Ribbon Day, in those days, the doctors, or really the health unit is the one that sponsored it, but the doctors and all of them got together, and they would go to every school in the county, out in the county, the elementary schools, and they would examine all the kids, all of us. I was examined, and they would look at their teeth, they would look at their skin, they'd weigh them, and they'd decide, well, he's too much overweight, or he needs to gain weight, or has some teeth that need to be repaired, or whatever it was, they'd write it down. And then they'd give them so much time to get that corrected. And if they did, they were given a blue ribbon. And so on Blue Ribbon Day, those of us that had received a blue ribbon for whatever we were doing, you had a white shirt, and we wore any kind of pants you wanted. We didn't have blue jeans back then. We had overall pants. Anyway, they would parade down Main Street with our blue ribbon. We were really proud of that blue ribbon on Blue Ribbon Day. I kind of missed that day.
Well, it was important for the country folks, country kids, because that may be some of those, particularly out in the 1st District and out in the real country, about the only time they ever got to come to town was Blue Ribbon Day. And the treat was they got to come to this building to go to the picture show. That was part of the treat. And they did it in shifts, of course, because there were about 80, at this period in the 30s, there were about 89 schools in the county.
Notice he said the picture show.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have a theater back then. It was the picture show.
Well, let's go on to the next one. This
Dorsey Crockett's on the corner.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. This came out of one of the newspapers as I was going through some old. Someone had given me a stack of newspapers, and I was really taken with that because when I came in 1970, they were still old men sitting on the courthouse lawn there and those picnic tables, and they were playing checkers. And this is just a few. This I think is in '58 or '59. That it came out of, and it's in color, but it was a sport, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, you see that every week really, especially on Saturday. But there's a water tower behind it at that time. I don't think it's there, and you shoot marbles underneath the water tower.
We'll talk about that one. Now let's look at this. This is 5 points. Of course, we've got the elementary school there, but. You'll see this little sign, this right here. Now, the kids all walked to school, didn't you? Mm-hmm. And to protect the children, first it would have been Mr. Oscar Garner here, and then Harris Irwin and Ewing Frazier, who later became sheriff. But they controlled that 5 points, didn't they?
They not only controlled the 5 points, they controlled the whole town. Yeah. Mr. Garner was hard on them. If he saw somebody that's out of order or drunk or something, and they didn't do what he said, he'd take his blackjack and whack him on the head and then take him on down to jail. He ruled the roost. And so, yeah, they directed all the traffic going in and out of the schools.
Notice also, Coach, that in this period, now this is in the 40s, and I don't know exactly, Dr. Rosalie Carter took this picture, but you'll notice something we don't have today, two-way traffic. City Hall, we'll see in a minute, is up on the square, and in January the 1st, 1959, they left the square and came to right over here on the other side of St. Paul's, the yellow brick house, which was the old funeral home of Bethune and those. Tell us about this rock wall and what it means to you, Coach.
Well, it means a lot. My earliest days, I can remember coming to town. My mother would put me up on the fence, and I got to walk on top of that fence. She was holding my hand, though, and we go around. That's my earliest memory, but that's not the main thing that I remember about that wall. I'll get around to that in a second. But that wall also was a place for the loafers to hang out. They didn't have anything to do that day, so they just sit on the fence. And also on Saturdays, especially Saturday morning, see, Williamson County and Franklin was a farming community. All around us was farms. And so the farmers would come to town on Saturdays. Their wives would do the shopping. The men would wait for them on this rock wall. And that's one of them. But the other one that I know what you're talking about is it's a really, really, really special one. I could get emotional here. I'm not going to, but I could, because that's the wall you sat on, and I remember some of them that sat there. And a bus would pull up. Mr. Lanier would come out, and he'd call your name, and you hop off the wall and get on the bus. This is World War II, and you're going to war. And I remember lots of them that got on. In fact, 13 boys in my graduating class didn't come home. 7 of them didn't come home from 13, the boys. We sat on that wall, hop off, get on the bus, and you're off to war. So that's the main thing I remember about that wall.
This photograph, of course, is in front of the historic Presbyterian Church, which the Presbyterians have occupied that corner since 1842. And then, of course, in the background there, you'll see the Methodist Church. Notice the steeple is gone because there was a storm that took that off, and it wasn't until a few years ago they put it back.
I'm leaving out one other thing about the wall. As I said, the loafers, and now sometimes it was not the loafers. We didn't have a lot to do on Sunday afternoon because everything's closed but one store, one drugstore. Yeah. Everything else is closed. We would come and sit on that wall, and we had a game. We would guess or see. He'd say, "Well, I'll take Lawrence County, or I'll take Murray County," and we see how many cars went by. This was before the interstate. Who would win? How many cars went by from Murray County or from Lawrence County or Pulaski or whatever, Giles County. So that was a game we played right there on that wall.
Traffic, before the interstate, it's hard to believe, but all the traffic going from Nashville to Columbia or from up into Chicago to Mobile came right through Franklin.
Well, during the war, the convoy would come through Franklin, and it would come all the way from about where the factory is now and all the way up to about where BGA is, and nothing but Army vehicles going through town.
Okay. I put this in because, this has kind of been the nerve center of town for many people, but I've always been amazed at how well kept this yard was.
Mr. Lavender.
Well, Mr. Lavender, but later is Mr. Fitzgerald.
Yeah, Mr. Fitzgerald, yeah.
But they did just, it was almost manicured. They really took pride in that.
Well, that was without power mowers, push mowers.
And the clippers, too.
And, oh, yes, and then we loved that because more June bugs than you could shake a stick at. So we get over and catch those June bugs, and then tie a thread on their leg and let them fly around, and that was exciting.
Okay, Coach, tell us about the picture show and what we're seeing here.
Yeah, there it is. Again, Saturday afternoon was our day, because on Saturdays that's when we had the cowboy movies. And we used to say, you sat so close down to the front, you get powder burn from the shots out of in the movies. And we wouldn't dare go into this building at that time during the week because they had old love stories. They was kissing in there and all that sort of thing. We wouldn't dare go to that.
What's going on here is, you'll read right in there, Mr. Lewis Ida, who had the Ford dealership next door here, he was giving away a new automobile, a brand new 1949, and Miss Alexander won. Mm-hmm. And I should have put that picture in there of her beside the winning car. But bicycles, of course, was a major, if you could afford one, that was a major transportation for a lot of the kids. And they would come and just leave their bikes on the curb. Uh-huh. Again, it was a trusting town.
Do you have Mr. Ida's place next door?
I don't think, maybe it'll be in, no. Well, this is when we were working on the theater. This is the...
I think I can tell this anyway. The next door was Mr. Ida's place, and Miss Agnes Bennett,
Oh,
a well-known lady in town. She was on up in age, and she shouldn't have been driving, but she was driving. And she had an automobile in there one day, and she's coming out onto Main Street, but she thought she put her foot down on the brake. She put it down on the accelerator and went right straight across the street, across that sidewalk, and right into John M. Green's insurance office and parked right beside his garage. I mean, behind his desk, right beside his desk. Just boom, right straight across the street. And then wait, one more. I got to give him one more here. And now you got. You may have a better picture of this, but right straight across the street was the only black resident business in town. It's Redmond.
Yeah.
And one of the funniest things to me was this. Upstairs, they got into some sort of argument, had a fight, and one of them got hit and knocked through the window out down onto the sidewalk, and the paper had the next day, had it in the paper, the Review-Appeal, that he exited through the window. He got knocked through the window.
I was so excited when this picture came up because it was right in the process when the Heritage Foundation was trying to get information about what was this building like. And there was a lot of discussion about the colors of the canopy and what was on it. And if you'll notice, well, you can't see it on this picture, but in real life, that's a little dark, but it's a tin. And so when Mary Pierce saw that, she jumped for joy because they were trying to put something else on there. And when she saw this, she says, no, we're going to do this, as Mary can do. When she gets her mindset to it, she usually gets her way. But notice here on the side of what today is Chico's building, but it was the National Store. And of course, on this corner was the Harpeth Bank.
Harpeth Bank.
And then, of course, Sandlin Drug may have been there, but it may have been
Gray
white.
at one time. Gray Drug.
No,
not gray. White.
White.
Excuse me, white. I got one color wrong.
Yeah. Gray's down that way. But let's look now at the next one. This again is a picture of the picture show. But now Mr. Redmond's place would be
that white one there, I believe.
Yeah, the dairy.
Right along in there.
Yeah, it's got a dairy whip or something. I think he was selling ice cream and also later selling whiskey.
Yeah.
Whiskey and ice cream go together, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
Number, please.
Okay,
Tell us about that, Jimmy.
That's where CC's is now.
That's right.
That was Doug Ahern, where CC's is now was Doug Ahern grocery store. Then it was the telephone office. Yeah. And had the operators, that's what they are. And in those days, you call the operator, and one of those would answer you, and you say, give me such number, and they'd plug you in for that number. But one of the cutest ones that I can remember is again, Franklin, in those days, everybody in town knows everybody else. And if you don't believe that, listen to this. I called Lillian one day. Her name was Lillian Warford. I said, Lillian, give me number 79, please. She said, Jimmy, they're not at home. They've gone to the grocery. So she recognized my voice, knew who I wanted, knew where they were. That's how close we were.
What I think so important about this,
There you go.
I'm sorry. What I think so important about it is this picture is this is the staff, and these ladies handled all the telephone calls in the area. Of course, the different parts of the county had another exchange, Triune and College Grove, but these ladies plugged you in, and this went on until 1957. That's hard to believe that we didn't get direct dialing in Franklin until 1957. This is another 5 points show, but you'll see, a view, but you can see right up here, of course, is Corner Drug. Then we had...
Dr. Jenkins ran that.
Yeah, Dr. Jenkins ran this. And, of course, at one time, this is where Moody...
Right, Moody's Tower, they did the work in the back alley back there.
Yeah.
And right above them, I believe, was one of the dentists, Dr.
Dr. Odell was next door, yeah.
It was close by there, upstairs. And I forgot, we had one dentist at one time did this. I shouldn't even tell this, but anyway, he was pulling my tooth. And he was a frail guy, was real weak, and he said, get my wrist and help me. And I had to help pull my tooth.
that Dr. Corlett? Dr. Corlett. He was up in years by that time, too. Give him a little credit.
He was.
This building's kind of interesting. Today it's still there, but the Presbyterians owned the old building, and they tore it down and built this. Dr. Walker and Dr. Nolan, and one of the dentists was there. Which dentist?
Was
Dr. Beasley there before he went out?
Yeah, I think
Dr. Beasley, I think, was there.
Before he moved, he moved after that.
This is a nice building that was built in the 30s, I believe. But for some reason, I've always liked that photograph. And of course, this is another picture that was taken by Bill Montgomery, and it's St. Paul's. And you all may not know this, but St. Paul's down here on West Main Street is the only antebellum church. I mean, a church building that was there before the Civil War. The other churches they had a congregation here, but they weren't in the same building. The Methodist, of course, was down on 2nd Avenue and Church at that time. The Presbyterians were where they are now, but it was a different building, and the Church of Christ were on 4th Avenue. But this is the only church that was there.
Rick, will we be coming back to the doctor's side?
Okay, yes, sir.
Well, in those days, you didn't go to the doctor came to you. In other words, you'd call if something was wrong, and I can remember my mother said, call the doctor because I think my brother David was sick and he was going to come out. But anyway, we were playing in the yard, and she came to the back door and says, Dr. Nolan is on I believe Dr. Nolan was coming out to see about him, and said, catch him 2 frying-sized chickens. He didn't want any more pigs.
So it was a barter system.
He didn't have any money. They knew that, but they still took care of you.
I'll tell you good about, Dr. Walker. He had invested some money in Minnie Pearl chicken.
Yeah, he did.
It went under. I think he said he lost about $20,000, and he was telling Miss Nan she'd bring him a guinea. She'd kill a guinea and bring him a guinea. And he said, "Oh, Miss Nan, I'm so glad you did that," because she says, "I can't hardly eat chicken now." Okay, and here we are on the square, and we're looking on the west side of the square, and this right here has a West Point.
That's
Tell us about West
Tom
Point.
West, well-known man in Franklin, and you get hamburgers in there and eat in there if you wanted to, and it was a good place, and a lot of people knew that. That was called West Point, and he was in charge of it. Tom West was doing it.
Norm Smith was later.
And Norman Smith was in there, yes.
What amazes me is that, particularly over here on this side, they had curb service. You remember that?
Yeah, you come out there, you pull up there.
And
now, stay on that picture there for a while.
Okay, sure.
Well, no, I want to go across the street over to where the
in urban.
Okay. This is interesting, I thought, for you to understand. That's 3rd Avenue North, and we had what we called at that time I started to say it wrong. I started to say it like we called it, interurban train that circled the square and right back out 3rd Avenue all the way to Nashville, and you could catch the train right over there. And it was a little fella, we called it the Dinky, and you ride to Nashville on the Dinky, and that's where you catch it right there.
Right there.
And then finally, I think about the late 30s, early 40s, they stopped it, and we got buses.
41.
Yeah, and we call them the Franklin Interruption instead of Franklin Interurban, and you could ride to town into Nashville on buses instead of the little Dinky.
One of the, to give a little history about this, in 1909, they put the golden spike that connected the tracks between Franklin and Nashville, and it operated until November of 1941. And what I think is kind of ironic, they quit the interurban electric service and went to buses, which would need gas and tires and all this. But the main reason for that was because Nashville had already given up their electrical cars and had gone to buses, and they didn't want Franklin's cars coming in on the tracks. And so that was the reason why they did. And it probably it was time, I guess, to change. But it seems kind of ironic that it happened just about a month before Pearl Harbor, and we had the beginning of World War II. Now, this is another view of the square. And, of course, tell us about Red Grill.
The Red Grill right there on the corner.
That's right.
That was, what was his name?
Oscar
Godwin. He was the golden goose. This fellow, he was a good guy, came into Franklin, and he came in and spent money, probably spent $400 or $500 right away back in those days, and everybody thought he was the richest man in the world. He operated that, and he also, you're going to come up a few minutes with Willow Plunge Swimming Pool, plus some farms. And he got all involved, and everybody jumped on the wagon with him until one day he disappeared. He disappeared, and nobody got the money. Everything was on credit.
That's one kind of a bad habit that Franklin's had that I read in the hearing people talk about. People come to town that's got money, or people think they've got money, and they're very accepted. But Mr. Oscar Godwin, he put the fear of God in some of the banks, because they were really heavily. They had loaned him a lot of money, and he literally left one night clean. He had started a new men's store. And it was full of nice, expensive clothes, which I doubt he ever could have sold in Franklin. But people went down the next morning, and the store was empty.
Oh, you're going to come over to this side?
Yeah. You want, well, see, right. We've got, this, of course, is East Main. On this corner would have been Mr. King, J.M. King.
Yeah,
but we're going to get on
one of three places you could pump gas on Main Street. You drive down the street and just stop and get your gasoline on Main Street. That's one of them.
Yeah. I counted 17 filling stations between the bridge on the Nashville Pike and up at the high school. Going down Main Street. Now, some of you old-timers, Billy Speck can probably count, Billy, and see if you can count 17 filling stations or places to get gas from starting down at the bridge and going all the way to the maybe more than that, but up at least to Folk Street. Again, the square has changed. It's round now rather than square. Again, these are two photographs that Mr. Montgomery did, and I'm just so excited about you getting another view. Of course, this is City Hall. This is the fire department. I don't see how they
had it all right there. Yeah. The jail and all's in there.
And the one cell back there, and Miss Hetty Farr was the Denton took the water bill.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we're going to see on this next picture over on this other side would be the Post Hotel.
Yeah.
Or the Hotel Post, they called it. Now, let's talk about Miss Carrie Wagner.
Yeah.
Right up there. This was her building. She was on the corner. And Mr. Dorsey Crockett right here. And you see Mr. Crockett sold coal and hardware. And he also had scales out there. Farmers could come. And if they were going to Franklin, going to Nashville to sell their livestock, they could pull their truck on there and get an idea of how much their cattle or hogs weighed. So when they take them up there, and they know what the market was, they could pretty much figure out what they're going to get. And eventually he had to take up his scales. They were in the way.
This is one of the first ones to deliver groceries.
Oh, yeah.
You'd call down there and tell them you want so-and-so, they bring it to you in the wagon. Are you going to get to the ice house?
Yeah, we're going. Well, let's see. You want to say something about the ice house?
I want to say something about the ice house.
Well, I didn't get that. I didn't get that.
Okay. In those days, you didn't have refrigerators and deep freeze and all that sort of thing, and you buy the ice by doing this. If you lived in town, you had a square card about a foot square, and in each corner was 50 pounds and 25 and 100 or 75 or whatever, and you'd hang it on your front porch, whatever's up on top, they'd come down the street and see, and they'd bring you in 75 pounds if you had it up there. And so that's how you did the ice. And then they deliver you coal also. Mr. Gentry Black, but down on West Main, would bring you coal and bring it and load it in for you. But I thought the ice was really interesting because when we were small, we always liked to see the Iceman coming because we'd run and get a little lump of ice. They'd break off a piece in the summertime, and we'd hold it. And then we'd make homemade ice cream. And my daddy, before he passed away, had a little trick, and he would get rid of us. If we went his way, he'd say, okay, we're going to turn ice cream. And we get to the point it's too hard for us to turn it, and he wanted to get rid of it. So he would give us a lump of ice and hold that in your hand and see how many times you can run around the house without dropping it. And we'd run, and finally it gets so cold, you throw it down. By then, he's finished with the ice cream.
I want to say this about Mr. Crockett. He was one of our leading businessmen in town. He had a great business mind. He owned a lot of property around town and out at several farms all around the county. But Mr. Tyler Berry, when I was interviewing him, was telling me about he was a young man at the time, and he said someone had called up past BGA for a bushel of coal. Now, Mr. Crockett sold coal by the pound. A bushel was a good measurement, and his delivery guy was not there. So here was Mr. Crockett, an old man by that time. He put that bushel basket of coal on the bicycle, the front of his bicycle, and he pumped up Main Street and all the way up the hill there past the high school, delivered the coal and came back. And Mr. Tyler said, Mr. Crockett, why would a man like your age go all the way up on that hill for that 25 cents? He said, well, son, that was 25 cents I didn't have.
Yeah, he put it tight.
Now let's say something about Miss Carrie Wagner. She's famous. Back then, people could in town, you could get your groceries every day. You just call down to any of the stores, Hills or any of them, and they had delivery boys, and you can see the wagon there. But one of the things I always liked to hear about Miss Carrie Wagner was when the phone rang, she'd pick it up and she'd say, all right.
Yep, that's her.
And there's the water stand you were talking about. You played marbles under.
Marbles under there. Can we go back to Wagner's there? You're going to go around to the Cotton Barn.
No, I didn't go down that way. But you want to talk about Tom Cotton's barn?
Yeah, right behind Wagner's there. It's on 3rd Avenue going out towards the interstate. There was was the mule barn. Mr. Tom Cotton had a barn there. It had a big oval in there. We thought that was really nice. But that's where they bought the mules and sell mules on Saturdays. And sometimes everybody would hang out around there, around the mule barn. And one day somebody was chasing a local thug, and he ran around the square. The police was chasing him, and he made a mistake. He ran in the mule barn and jumped over a fence in with some wild horses and mules, and they started kicking. He came right back over to said, take me. The police took him there.
This particular photograph, of course, would be the south side of the square with the courthouse and the Williamson County Bank. But this water stand, that provided the water pressure for the town. The water came to Franklin about 1906, I believe, and you can see that they built that. 1905 is when they built the stand. $5,000, and it held 100,000 gallons of water. Now that was a pretty good reserve for the town because people didn't take bath every day, and a lot of them collected rainwater. But that was there when I came in '70, and I think shortly after that they remodeled the courthouse, and I think that's when that was taken down.
That's about
somebody
right.
out there in the audience can probably correct me. Okay, German Hospital.
Yeah. Dr. German,
Dr. Rice, Dr. Guffey.
Dr. Guffey.
And then Dick German was the dentist.
Yeah.
This later became a Greystone nursing home. Of course, Charlie Sawyer and his Miss Sawyer kept this for many years. But I remember when we came, Elaine's grandmother was in this room. Would be right in there. Yeah. And later, as I came to town often after school, but there were this little porch right here would be full of little old ladies waiting for somebody to come and visit them. So I'd come and spend a half an hour talking to them, and I really gained more information about what happened in Franklin on that little porch right there. And
that was really our first hospital right there.
Yeah, 38 to 58, so it was there 20 years. This was Miss House, Betty House. We called her Crutch.
Yeah, but I don't remember that story.
You don't?
I can't help you.
Miss Betty House, her husband was Smith House, and he was a lawyer in town, and they were putting up electric poles in town. And she, probably one like right there, she, by accident, stepped into the hole, and she sued the company. And, of course, her husband was a lawyer, and she got a nice little sum out of it, but she only drew the check as long as she was crippled. And she carried the crutch around with her the rest of her life. And they said you'd go knock on the door, and she'd forget and come to answer the door, and then she'd realize she'd missed her crutch, so she'd go back and get it and come to the door and open the door with the crutch.
That's, you continue straight out, that dead end.
That's right, that's 4th Avenue.
We used to play tricks on people from out of town, and they'd ask how to get to someone. We'd say, go down there and turn right and go straight ahead. It was a dead end.
That wasn't very kind.
No, it wasn't very smart.
Not very kind. Here we have the second hospital. We had three clinics or 3 hospitals in Franklin. Of course, we had the German hospital. This is Dr. Pyle on Church Street. And then we had Dr. Johnson up on Columbia Avenue. But this Dr. Walter Pyle. And of course, I put this in. Mary Pierce, when she knew we were going to do this program, she said, "Well, you got to say something about this house right here." Was on the corner of 5th Avenue and Wilbur Corn, and he died, and his daughter was living in New York City, and she wasn't coming back to Franklin, and so she sold the house to Humble Oil Company, and they tore down this house and built a filling station. Now, oddly enough, the filling station didn't stay there very long, because later they built this shopping center we have today. But because this house was torn down, some of the citizens were made aware that, are we going to just sit around and let all our old buildings be torn down? And so it's because of the destruction of this house that the Heritage Foundation got its support, and it was organized in '67. And of course, now we're back to the public school. This building, 1907, 1963, and of course, you've already mentioned about Jay Corn.
Yeah, there he is, right there.
Yeah. And I want to say, did you have anybody ever play in the street?
Not that I know of.
Was there not a fence up there when you were going to school?
No, there was no fence. There was no fence.
But there was later, wasn't there?
Yeah, later on, but we didn't have one.
You didn't have one? Okay. Now, this, I found this picture, Jimmy.
Let's skip on this.
No. Many of y'all that lived in Thompson Station may remember Miss Tommy Gibbs. But at the time, when this was taken in '31, she was Miss Tommy Anderson. And that's her on the end. And, of course, on the other end is Huddy Alexandria.
Huddy right here.
Yeah. And
Mary Williams right behind him.
Yeah.
She lives in Montgomery, Alabama now. Billy Martin Gibbons is third one down.
Yeah, he's third down.
Yeah, I can name most of them.
Well, they are a lot of pictures.
That's an intelligent-looking group, isn't it?
Yeah. But you know, the sad thing is there's not many of them left.
No, there's not.
And now you've come up, you said Miss Josephine was ambidextrous.
Yeah, that's it.
And that's a handsome group. But count the children there. It wasn't uncommon to have 40 or 50 children in your class. And how these ladies, and Franklin was known to have great teachers at this time. When you went through the regiment of Miss Laura Mae Miller and Mary Campbell Burnett and Josephine Wirt, you had it. But look what they were working under. of course, they were all pretty well, the children were well behaved, better than they are now.
Well, I remember even when I started teaching myself in 1947, I would have some family that the daddies would come to me and say, Coach, if my boy ever gives you into trouble, whip him, and when he comes home, I'll whip him too. So we didn't have any trouble with those people.
Good-looking bunch, though. And this is Franklin High School.
Oh, boy.
Many of y'all may not realize this, but of course, the high school started in 1910 in Franklin, public education, public high schools. And they met in the old elementary school, and then they outgrew that, and they went over to the Harrison House, which was over where CC's is now, next to St. Paul's. And then in 1926, the city of Franklin had a referendum. They knew that high schools were important, and they really they needed a new building. And so the county, Williamson County at the time, was kind of backward when it came to education. They didn't want to, the county court were notoriously stingy. And they didn't want to spend any money for education much. But anyways, the city of Franklin was more progressive, and so they passed a referendum and passed a bond issue for $125,000. And they went up to next to the Carter House and bought Dr. Henderson's old house, and they moved it over on Claiborne Street, which has just been recently moved this last year finally. And they built this building for $125,000. Now, the arrangement was with the county that the county paid the teachers and supplied the school, but Franklin City, the city of Franklin, owned the building. But this building it's one of the best looking buildings that the town built, I think, in the early 19th century. And there's some good memories there. That if you're going up Columbia Avenue, these steps are still there.
Yeah, before you leave that, the Carter House is just to the left.
Right here.
Your audience will look at it. Carter House is over here, because I want to come back to that a little bit later on.
Now, this has got a memory for you, isn't it, Coach? Tell us about what that morning was like.
I was teaching there, and this is Ernest McCord, also teaching at Franklin High School at that time. And we came to school that morning about the same time. We were the first ones there, and when the strike, lightning hit, and it caught it on fire. Well, we had been in a meeting the week before with the State Department of Education, and they made this statement to the faculty: if you ever have a fire here, you're going to lose all your records because you don't have a fireproof vault. And so we remembered that. Now, we're the only two there. The building is locked. We ran up to that door right there, broke it open, went in and broke open the office door, went inside, got the file cabinets, and came out. And as we came out of the door of the office, the papers on the bulletin board were catching on fire. It was that close to getting to us. We came out and down on the sidewalk and put it down, down there. And then the fire, just as you say, and it was raining. So after a little while, somebody said, "Hey, these filers are going to get wet. We need to take them across the street over here." We couldn't pick them up. The adrenaline got it out of there. So that's what happened to us that day.
Coach, can you tell us about how did some of the senior pictures survive?
Some of the library is right here on the left. As you go in the door, there was some was in there. And Mr. Thompson's picture, the principal of the school, he'd already moved out. They sort of pushed him out of office, but his picture was still hanging there on a charred wall, just as good as that was. That's where some of them were. I don't know how it survived that, but it was on this side, on the left side, though.
Mm-hmm. So the library would have been
right here on the left,
right there,
right in there, yeah, right across there.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Now this was a three-story building. If you count the basement.
Now, three-story count the basement. Yeah.
Yeah. What was in the basement?
The home ec department was down there, and the shop, woodworking shop was down underneath.
Now, where was the cafeteria?
We didn't have a cafeteria. You brought your lunch,
then?
And you brought your lunch in a newspaper. And those of us that like athletics, we brought the sports page wrapped around ours, and they'd put it out on the walkway, out on the stairs back there. And some old boys would go out there, and they knew who brought the best lunches to school, and they'd move them around because they all looked the same, and they got a better lunch that way.
Well, now, when did Miss Givens take over?
Well, she finally did come, but it was not a cafeteria, as you would say, that where you line up and go through the line.
Yeah.
She had a place there for to begin to serve some things.
Well, I thought some of the home ec people would.
Well, they may have later on, but I'm just telling you that's the way it was in the beginning.
Okay. I've selected some well-known teachers of this period, and you've already mentioned Mr. Daley Thompson. Tell us what kind of man he was.
Well, I have, when you go to school, you're impressed with the teachers many times, and there I am right there. Mr. Daley Thompson, Mr. Yates just had such an impression on me. I wanted to do anything they said was it. He was a quiet sort of man, but he ruled the roost. In other words, if somebody got out of line, in those days, they'd take, he'd just go get him by the head and pull him out of the desk and just give him a whack across the head and put him back down, and didn't have more trouble with him. And Mr. Yates' hands were like a ham, a huge ham. And one boy, I won't use his name because he's still around, he was talking when he was not supposed to, and Mr. Yates reached over and picked him up by one leg and held him up like that and hit him about 4 or 5 times in the rear end and put him back down. He didn't say anything else. Miss Johnny Ball, she was the librarian. When I first started teaching, she came in there one day. I had never taught a day in my life, and so she came the first day and said, "Where's your roll book?" I said, "Right here." Come to me, and she helped me fill it out and show me how to do it. Now, who we got there?
She was a mentor to a lot of folks, I think. And then, of course, Miss you've already mentioned.
Yeah, I've already mentioned her. Great lady.
Mr. Lawson.
Mr. Lawson down on the corner.
And Barry Sutton.
Well, he was at the high school after he moved out here.
Yeah, you were with him for a while.
Short time with him. He was a Golden Glove guy.
Yeah. This is your graduating class. You see I've put in red. If you look over there's not many of these left either.
No, not many. I'm looking now. I can't see many more.
Well, you and Francis are right there together, but that's two, obviously. We've just lost some every time you read the paper. This is your class of football team of 51 and 52. Tell us about what a team this was.
This was a really good football team.
Yeah.
I can think of one or two maybe that were better than them, but my fondest memories go back to these because they were just something special to me. They were all just Franklin and country boys around town, and find that Billy King's on there somewhere.
Yeah, he's up, I think, right up in here, right in there.
Oh, boy. He was a guy that's unbelievable. Toughest guy I believe I've ever been around was Billy King, Mr. William King's boy. And he, by the way, he had several brothers, and that's one of the daddies said, "Whip him and I'll whip him when we get home." So I never had any trouble with Billy King.
His sister's out in the audience tonight, but
great, one of the best people I've ever known right there.
Yeah. Then 62 to 77, your experiences at BGA.
Oh boy, this is different altogether in a way. My class, I taught biology, was on the right side over here, and people, some of the friends of my friends that lived down on Folk Street and all down on the Baptist Neck, they wanted to ask me something. They come out of the window and peck on the window. And I just pull the window up and ask what they want, and they tell me we go on. Well, that was Franklin then, though. And then we had study hall upstairs. One of the cutest things I believe I ever remember about up there, we had boarders at that time. And the boarders, all of them had an alarm clock. And so they pick out certain teachers that they knew to get. And one I'm having in mind right now, he was on duty. So they got together and they all set their alarm clocks for different times, about 5 minutes apart. And then they go up and put them in the desk at night. See, that most of the desks were empty, just the boarders were there. The day students were not there. And one would go off, and he'd go over and cut it off, and at the time he'd get it cut off, another one over here, and another one over. And finally he goes over and gets one of them and goes to the window and opens the window and said, wham, broke it down on the concrete floor down there. Everybody else ran over and got their alarm clock. He stopped it right there.
Tell us about 1956.
Oh, this is at BGA.
Yeah.
This is an outstanding football team. You say, well, sure, you'd say that. Well, I'll tell you how good they were. We were undefeated, and of the starting 11, 6 of them got SEC scholarships, and 3 of them started the freshman year in college at the University of Tennessee. That's Don Dembo right there, and I see Adam Anderson, George Silver started up there, and Steve Robinson. There's a great football team. That's it right there. Yes.
Well, we haven't mentioned.
Bud Hamilton up here in the
We
corner.
haven't mentioned Bobby.
My brother Bobby's right there with helping us.
Yeah.
Yes, he helped us coach. Back then, we didn't have about 2 or 3 coaches. All we had. Oh
Now let's
God!
talk
Oh
about
God! Oh God! We could be here all night. Franklin had that willow plunge, and nobody else in the United States had anything any better than that. There's 2 pools. You see one here, the one just on the other side of that one. And the water flowed in over here where my left hand is on this corner from a spring into the pool, through the pool, out the opposite side. In other words, spring water was flowing in and out of there all the time. That's weeping willow trees on the north side, the west side, beautiful place. Here's our flower garden. Then the hillside is over there where there was sun. That's where most of the people were there.
Yeah.
And there, now here, this is the hillside. Yeah. You can see it now. And it was perfect. You couldn't ask anything any better. During World War II, the Army would ship soldiers to Franklin, Tennessee, just to go to Willow Plunge. There's the pool. And nobody had anything like it. That's one of the saddest tragedies in this town is it's gone now, and it's nothing left of it. Boy, if we could have saved that, we had us something there. Because they came from everywhere.
How cold was the water?
It was cold. It was spring water.
Yeah.
It was cold.
I get
well, now, what happened, though, this pool, this is what we call this the little pool. It didn't have diving board. The other one is the big pool. The little pool, the water flowed in here first. And by the time it filled up, it would warm it up, and it would put it over in the big pool and put more water in here. But that was cold water coming in. That had warmed up a little bit, see? So there was a difference in the cold one and the warm one.
Now, let's tell us about Miss Kennard, Porter Kennard.
Mr. Claiborne Kennard built the pool, and he was an unusual man. I'll give you an example of what he was like. He developed something that most people don't realize, concrete blocks. That's him. Yeah. What we do without concrete blocks. He did it up in his barn. He also was involved in the landing gears during World War II on bombers. He was a brilliant man. But Mr. Kennard was also, something was wrong. He had 2 sons, Claiborne Jr., and Claiborne Jr. became a war hero during World War II. He was a fighter pilot. He would come home with his uniform on, a white scarf around his neck, most handsome-looking guy you ever saw. He not only looked at, he was at. He shot down 33 and a half German planes himself. And so that was Claiborne Kennard Jr., but Amos's other brother was not. Amos was a drunk, really, if you just know, for lack of a better word. And some people think this is what happened. We don't know this, and I shouldn't maybe even say this, but Mr. Kennard one day came right down here to the pool, pulled out a pistol and shot himself in the head.
Tell us about Porter and how.
Well, she would come down, and what she would do, she'd sit down here in the garden in those chairs, and she had a sewing basket, and she would sew. But some of the people would come by and think, look at that poor old woman down there sewing, and in that basket might have been $15,000. She had all the money in that basket, and the people felt sorry for her. And now that was a wonderful, wonderful place. There it is again, the hillside. See there?
Yeah.
Oh,
this is another picture of Bill Montgomery Tuck, and that looks like a whole sea of seals out there, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, had the drink stands over on this side, get Cokes and all. Right there it is. There's the drink stand. Coca-Cola Orange Crush and Welchade and candy and moon pies and all that sort of thing was there. But right up above it, do you have the one up above it?
No, I don't have that one.
Well, that's the coffee shop, and there you could get hamburger and cheeseburgers and Miss Robinson's chest pies. Boy, sometimes they disappeared up there. They had a miniature golf course in behind that. It was a great place.
Tell us about Phil Isaacs.
Phil was working. Phil would come out sometimes, and Mrs. Kennard's down here in the garden, and he's over here, and he's supposed to be working. Well, he'd be sitting around here not working, but he'd shake those empty cartons every once in a while, and she'd think he was working. Bang, 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 bang. He's just sitting around. He'd just keep it shaking every once in a while.
This is an aerial photograph to give you some idea. Today, you go out there and it's hard to imagine where things are, but we were able to, Coach drew for me a couple years ago his idea and place everything, and then I found this aerial photograph, which pretty much, this is Brico Block, the block company, and then we had the airfield. After the war, Claiborne Jr. taught you could go out and he would teach you to fly. And of course, they had a 9-hole golf course, miniature golf, the pavilion. Elaine and I married in 1969, and I think it was Good Friday of that year. Uncle Al was working the farm for Miss Kennard, and she told him to go down there and tear down everything. And so he gave Ed Ladd the pavilion to tear down. So Ed and I tore that down in one day. On it was a Friday before Easter.
I'll tell you how popular it was. Nashville had one swimming pool, Cascade Plunge, out at the fairground. Franklin had Willow Plunge. Guess where all the people in Nashville went swimming? Willow Plunge.
And
oh yeah.
Tell us about how
what you do. They collect at the gate. That's the gate, and the carload would come in and had 3 people in it or 4 people or whatever, and they'd come in and he'd look in the car and say, okay, $75, $4 or $3 or $2, whatever it was, and you paid at the gate. But some of the guys, they knew that, so sometimes they would stop up at Henry's Grocery up there by the railroad track and get in the trunk of the car, but they didn't know this. He would call down to the pool and say, "There's a car coming in." He'd give the description of it. There's one in the trunk, and so we'd be waiting for him. And he'd come. It's a hot day, and we'd go, "How you doing?" You know, and he'd get out. He'd look back. We'd lean up against the trunk, and he'd look back every once in a while. The driver would, and then after a while, he'd go, "Boom, boom, let me out of here. I'm about to die." It was hot in there, so we had fun with those guys that way.
I notice up here, this is the sign that they used, and you may not be able to see it, but when I enlarged it, I found that the price was 33 cents, and there was a 7 cents, I guess that was a sales tax, entertainment tax that the state charged. So it was $40 cents to get in, and Huddy Alexander is standing at the gate taking in. Now, they came in and they could park in that field before you got to the pavilion, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Let me share something with again, I think I need to. It was not all good there. No blacks came to Willow Plunge. But Mr. Kennard in the early days had a sign. You know what I'm going to say, don't you? It said, "For Gentiles only." And the rabbi from Nashville came out and said, "Mr. Kennard, if you'll take the sign down, we won't come." So he took the sign down. That shows you how times have changed.
But you know, I talked to Joanne Posnack, and she said she went swimming.
Well,
but this was after the war.
Yeah, that's after. This is in the late 30s.
Yeah. And of course, tell us about Martin Turner and your connections with. With the fur industry.
Yeah.
I'm surprised there's any
Martin Turner, that's, see, furs and walnuts. Furs is what I was mainly interested in. In those days, ladies loved to wear fur coats, and they were popular at that time. And they were pretty expensive. So we had learned to trap animals, especially the muskrat and the mink. Now, we trap most any kind. I'll tell on myself here. One time I caught a polecat. We call them skunks now, but then it was a polecat. I let him spray me because when I went to school, Miss Wirt sent me home, so I smelled bad. And so he got out of school that day. But we would catch the muskrat and the mink, and what we would do with them is skin them, turn them wrong side out and flesh them, put them on the board and dry them until we collected a lot of them, maybe 40, 50, 60 muskrats. And the mink wasn't near that many, but we just 8 or 10 or 15 of those rascals, skin them, flesh them, put them on the board until we collected all of them a whole season. Then I'd take them to Mr. Martin Turner, and he'd go through and he'd give us $2, $3, $4 for the muskrat. Back in that days, that's like good money. The mink was bringing $10 to $15 a piece. So I made enough money catching animals that I bought my own clothes and gave my mother money. She didn't have to buy anything for me after that, after I learned to do that. But that was Mr. Martin Turner. And, oh, by the way, John Will worked for him, and he'd climb upstairs there and put the furs up, and we'd put walnuts in the driveway where we lived at that time. Cars run over and haul them for us, and we'd get a load of those, take them down and sell them walnuts.
I picked out some characters that I want you to comment on. These are not bad characters necessarily, but just characters. Franklin seemed to have an abundance of people who had a reputation, one way or the other. And these are some that I want you to comment on. Of course, we got Spare Dime. He's kind of a legend today.
This is Spare Dime in the upper left corner.
Yeah.
He would go around to people here in Main Street and just hold his hand out and say, "Could you spare a dime? Could you spare a dime? Could you spare a dime?" Until they didn't know his name, they just called him Spare Dime. And so Spare Dime would get enough dimes to buy him some liquor, and he's gone. Who you got next?
Harry Smith. Tell us about Harry. Postman.
Oh, the post. Oh, yeah. Well, Harry Smith, the next man, a great guy, good family, but he liked to hunt. And sometimes you could find your mail out in somebody's field where he'd been rabbit hunting. He'd take the mail with him if he wanted to go hunting. And I remember one time he brought some mail to our house, and he walked up the porch and just threw it up and said, "Here's your mail," pitched it out on the porch for us. All right, next day, is that Bear Odie?
That's Bear Odie.
Oh, we could be here all day talking about Bear. Bear was a guy that was a character, local character. He loved dogs. In fact, he loved them too much. And he would get dogs, and some man, Mr. MacArthur, a friend of his, came here, had a good hunting dog, and all of a sudden his hunting dog gone. He said, "I think I know where we might find the dog." So they go up to Bear's house, and the dog is tied with a string, and the man said, "Is that your dog?" Said, "I don't know." The dog ran over to his master and jumped up on him, put his paw, said, "He's friendly." Bear said, "He always was friendly." He looked down and had paint on it. He painted the dog, and he got arrested for that one. But everybody liked Bear.
Yeah.
Bear, he was a character. We liked him. Who you got over there?
Crunk Mathis.
Crump Mathis. Crump was a guy that was my manager for years and years. And Crump actually was a good guy, but he had problems. He'd been in the Marines during the war, and he was sort of a nervous guy. Yeah, he was shell-shocked, really. And sometimes he'd just sleep in the gym on tops of, just anywhere he could. He'd just spend the night there. That's where he lived. And then who you got on the phone?
I got Fred.
Oh, Fred. We ain't got time to talk about Fred. Fred be really, he was. I think he would be the chairman of the board right there. Fred was. You see him everywhere. Fred Buford was up and down the streets here, and people see him coming. They almost hide from him almost.
He never met a stranger like that.
Yeah, he didn't. He's always had.
Tell us about Miss Jane Owen.
Oh, Miss Jane Owen she was a local Review Appeal. She was in there, and she could write the gossip column because that's what she did. She was just a big gossiper. Everybody liked her, though. Yeah. She lived over here on Church Street, I believe it is, right there's where she lived. And then here's Dick Garner.
Go back now, tell me about what she'd always say when you'd pass by. You'd go see.
Oh, she did. Rebecca. Oh, here's a good one. She went to church where I was. It's 4th Avenue Church of Christ. And one day I was coming down the street right in front of her house, going down to see Rebecca, my wife to be, and she said, "Jimmy, you're going to see Rebecca?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." Said, "She's Presbyterian, you know."
They didn't count.
That was it. That's the two characters right there. That Did and Harry.
Yes.
London Garner. They're the ones, the pranksters for the city is right there. Then Jim Bennett's next at Bennett Hardware Store. He'd roll up and down there, and he was a big sports supporter, you know, and all that sort of thing.
Never missed a game, I bet, did he?
Yeah, and I can't make out who that is.
Mr. Hugh.
Who?
Chanel.
Oh, that's my father-in-law.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Say
couldn't
something
for
good
him.
about him now. He was a good man.
Oh, yeah, he was really a good man. He worked at the bank. He was at the, first with Chanel Green Insurance, and then he went into the Harpeth Bank. What's the last?
Robert Jordan, Joy Dale,
Oh,
Darius,
Jordale. Yeah, that's
the milkman.
the milkman. Then milk was delivered to your house. He just put it on your porch, just like the ice man would come along. They'd put so much milk on your porch. That was Jordale Dairies out on Lewisburg Pike.
Yeah. Another dairy man, it may be just a little bit before you, but Mr. Kelly Phillips.
Yeah,
was up on Columbia Pike, about right there before you get to Downs Boulevard today. But he had an ad I enjoyed reading it was in the 1930s in the Review Appeal, and it says, you can't beat our milk and you can't whip our cream. I mean, you can whip our cream.
That's right.
And this is probably one of the most
Oh, boy.
memorable times in the 1940s, and we have you're right there at the scene. Give us a little background.
You remember
of this.
earlier I asked you to remember this Franklin High School to the left was the Carter House.
Yeah.
What year was that?
49.
49. I went up to the high school this particular morning. It was on Monday. Yes, it was on Monday morning. And you got to follow me here because Sunday night it had poured down rain, not a little rain. It really rained about midnight. That's the first clue in the story right there. It poured down rain at midnight. Monday morning I go to school up by the Carter House, and the windows were sort of stuffy, and the old gym had a balcony up above, and I was up above opening windows. When I got around to the south side of the gymnasium and opened that window to the Carter House, I looked down in the parking lot. In a gravel parking lot was Mr. Thompson, the principal, and what I thought was a football dummy on the ground. He said, "Coach, come down here, I need you." So I thought, oh gosh, he left a dummy out or something. So I go down there. It's not a dummy. It's a young lady, face down in the gravel, dark hair, her hair on both sides, fanned out, and down the back was a perfect part where the rain had fallen and parted her hair. Out of the left side, I can see it now, out of the left side was about a half-inch stream of blood running off down through the gravel. She had on a trench coat. She had on riding habits, penny loafers, and white socks. And just to the right of her head, now she's face down, just to the right of her head was a rolled-up Indianapolis newspaper and a half-empty bottle of whiskey setting up in the gravel. Now, that's hard to do, but it was setting up. And I said, "Mr. Thompson, anybody touched anything?" He said, "No, anybody touched anything." So about that time, the coroner came, Ed Young. He said this first thing. As soon as he got out, he said, "Anybody touched anything?" We said, "No, hadn't touched anything." Well, he took pictures, and then he got down on one knee and took her by the shoulder and turned her over, but her head didn't come with it. Then he had to take her head and move it around. Her head was almost cut off. He said, "Anybody know her?" We said, "No, we don't know who she is." That started the story that you're talking about right there. Now, I don't think we got until next Wednesday to tell that story.
No.
But that started the story. That is Betty Burge. That's the Betty Burge story.
Betty and Sherman, her son, and then this is Sheriff Frazier. And this is kind of a interesting photograph. This is Sherman's pants that he was wearing, and you see they're covered with blood. Now he was at the time they had a slaughterhouse out on Lula Lane off of Carter's Creek Pike, and he was working out there, and so he said, "Well, that's because of the slaughterhouse." But when they tested the pants, it was human blood. And I must say that in 1974, 75 or 6, 75. I worked all day with this guy, and I didn't know who he was until I took him home, and I went back and I said, Miss Nan, who was that guy? And she said, well, that was Sherman Purge. He killed that lady back in several years ago, but Betty died in prison.
Yeah.
And Sherman came back. He served his time. They were sentenced to death here in Franklin. And the trial was in like a week after the murder. It was the quickest trial you could imagine because they were surely the ones that did it. But
I think the house is still up there.
it's right behind where Hills, yeah, on Acton. And we just picked out some things here. So
They got to go home for breakfast. Bad eye ballad,
yeah,
Booger Hornberger. Chitlins, which is one of my favorites. I don't know where the old do funny. Here's 4-day.
Yeah.
That's 4-day right there.
but I say something about Do Funny because I was interested, in reading in the paper, he worked for Lund and Garner.
Yeah,
and
that's old
he,
Do Funny. He's the one that had the brick in the box. He thought it was shells.
Yeah.
That's old Do Funny.
But he was taking shoes and slipping
Yeah.
them out the window,
Yeah.
and he was selling them on the side.
Oh, funnel face. He's in my class, that boy was.
Gangster Ward.
Ward, Hoghead Dodson, High Pocket. Well, now, Mr. Reason was a good guy. You know why they called him High Pocket?
Yeah, he had legs long.
Well, his body, he was tall, but his body wasn't that much, but his legs were about 6 feet long. And that made his pocket way up in it, so they called him High Pocket. Hog lard, old folks. Papa Charlie, if you had to move a piano, go get Papa Charlie, because he could pick it up. Santa Claus Clark, the Spider Cook, Scootaloo Skinner. I remember all of them.
Okay, we have been at this a little over an hour and a half, and we were trying to keep it at an hour and a half. That's about all your bladder can stand. Bob, you want to take over, and maybe if anyone's got any questions, we will entertain any questions that you may have.
First of all, though, are you going to give them the history test? No?
I quit giving pop tests a long time ago.
First of all, let's thank them for that. Isn't that a phenomenal? For some of us, we have to write the answers on our sleeve so we remember who we are. These guys can go on and on. Anybody with some questions for either Jimmy or Rick? Any questions?
Bob, I want to say one more thing. Looking out there, somebody out there would win in the hot seat nights we used to have here in the theater because the seats were numbered, and if you were sitting in a certain seat, they'd pull a ticket out of the basket, and if you're sitting in that seat, then you won the hot seat. They'd have a prize for you.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah, it had bank night. Yeah, it had bank night.
Questions? Anybody at all? No?
That's good.